happen to notice in your bulletin the title of the sermon is By Any Other Name. And I'm wondering if anyone remembers where they might have heard that before. I thought I heard it. Okay. Shakespeare wrote, "What's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet." And if we think about religious liberty, that same question comes up. What's in a name? Religious liberty, you're for it, I'm for it. Have you ever heard of anybody that wasn't for it? As Seventh-day Adventists, we get our religious liberty convictions directly from the Bible. And in the U.S. Constitution, these inalienable rights are credited as coming from a creator. But in reality, when people say that they are for religious liberty, they really mean many different things. Because this rose can be smelled in different ways. And if you needed proof of this, think for a moment. It wasn't too long ago that we saw the head of the largest Christian church, the Pope, traveling as a conquering hero to Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, which is really the cradle of democracy in the United States, and to New York, to the United Nations, speaking grandly, not just of the environment, but of religious liberty. In fact, speaking as a champion of religious liberty. And you and I know that things are not quite as they seem. But it's worth thinking for a moment that religious liberty can mean many different things to many different people. Think back with me to the case of Kim Davis. Does that name ring a bell with anyone? That was the Kentucky County Clerk who refused to issue marriage licenses to gay couples after the Supreme Court ruling in favor of gay marriage. She was put up as a great heroine for religious liberty, standing for her principles. So let me ask you something. What about her deputy clerks? Very few thought that in this case, religious liberty, the right to hold a view and to project it, was perhaps not true religious liberty, because in reality, this individual and her supporters thought that it was fully acceptable for her views to be projected on her assistants. Regardless of what her assistants thought, they were told that they could not do what the state had demanded, but that their principle must coincide with hers. And those who had wanted the licenses, they also had to live within her viewpoint. So, regardless of whether or not you agree with her viewpoint, this is not religious liberty. God never forces the conscience. We are free moral agents, created by a God who gave us this incredible gift. And let me remind you again of the three angels' messages. And these are central to what we hold to be present truth, as Ellen White put it. And I want to call your attention to the first angel's message. We read it, and I'll read it again from Revelation 14, 6 and 7. Then I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel. In other words, a never-ending story. Gospel really means God's story. An everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters." You've heard it many times, but I can't emphasize this enough. We must give our first allegiance to God.
Amen.
let's turn to another thought now. That consistent with the first angel's message. If God made everything, and as Adventists we should be foremost in calling people to recognize that we are custodians of nature, we should be environmentalists. Not in the New Age liberal way that many people think, but we should be environmental in the truest sense of recognizing that we live here as custodians of what God has created. We ourselves, our bodies, and our environment. Have we missed the boat on that? You remember that Pope Francis, in his encyclical on the environment and in his visit to the United States, has taken the lead in promoting not just an environment, but in conjunction with that, has linked it to loyalty to God, and even worship on a particular day to celebrate that creatorship. Is that interesting to you? May be interesting, but it shouldn't be new news to us. With prophetic insight, Ellen White told us what would happen, and we see that it's happening right now. I'm going to share a few words from some papal encyclicals. You may recall a decade or so ago, Pope John Paul II came out with a document called Domini Dies. It laid out every biblical text in favor of the seventh-day Sabbath and accepted them at face value. And right there in that homily, the encyclical said that while the early Christians had no instructions from their Lord to change the day from Sabbath to Sunday, they felt that they had the authority. So with that out of the way, everything in the Bible related to the seventh-day Sabbath was applied to Sunday. That's what a lot of times we call bait and switch, if you will. But in this most recent encyclical, Pope Francis begins this way, almost the New Age approach. He says, in the words of the beautiful canticle by St. Francis of Assisi, he reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs. That's kind of a New Age mystical sort of approach, calling it Mother Earth. A little later, this is what appears in that same document. He says, it is my hope that this encyclical letter can help us to acknowledge the appeal, immensity, and urgency of the challenge we face. I will begin by reviewing the present ecological crisis with the aim of providing a concrete foundation for the ethical and spiritual itinerary that follows, is what his paper said. There's an agenda here. It continues. I will then consider some principles drawn from the Judeo-Christian tradition. I will advance some broader proposals for dialogue and action, which would involve each of us as individuals and also affect international policy. What could be international policy that the Pope, a religious leader standing in the political pulpit, is about to share? This is what he says. The laws found in the Bible dwell on relationships, not only among individuals, but also with other living beings. Along these same lines, he says, rest on the seventh day is meant not only for human beings, but also so that, quoting from the Bible in Exodus, your ox and your donkey may have rest. The biblical tradition, he continues, clearly shows that this renewal entails recovering and respecting the rhythms inscribed in nature by the hand of the Creator. We see this, for example, in the law of the Sabbath. On the seventh day, God rested from all his work. He commanded Israel to set aside each seventh day as a day of rest. Well, you might say, thank you, Brother Pope. You're doing our work for us, proclaiming the seventh-day Sabbath. Unfortunately, he called it a Jewish Sabbath. And he continues saying, a spirituality which forgets God as all-powerful and creator is not acceptable. This is how we end up worshiping earthly powers for ourselves, usurping the place of God, even to the point of claiming an unlimited right to trample his creation underfoot. That's the end of that quotation from him. We should be the ones to follow through on this. What does the Bible say? It says God is coming to destroy those who destroy the earth. Paul says that the whole creation is groaning together till now, waiting for its redemption. And now listen to what the Pope goes on to say. On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationship with God, with ourselves, and with others, and with the world. In other words, the environment. Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the first day of the new creation. His first fruits are the Lord's risen humanity, the pledge of the final transfiguration of all created reality. It also proclaims man's eternal rest in God. This is an amazing statement presented to huge crowds through the United Nations, through speeches to the Family Institute in Philadelphia, and then to our Congress. All here in the United States, where we consider ourselves the only superpower in the world. Here the world's religious superpower is proclaiming Sunday as a signal landmark of the Creator and a call to honor creation. If there ever was a religious liberty issue, this is it. In 1888, Alonzo T. Jones, the great Adventist pioneer for religious liberty, spent much of his energy and time before Congress, dealing with an initiative that was popping up in Congress led by Senator Blair. A direct national Sunday law. It said that under pain of law, all work, all secular activity was to cease. People were encouraged to worship. We do not yet have such a law, but in fighting that law successfully in his time, Alonzo Jones recognized and Ellen White confirmed that the battle against Sunday law and upholding God's principles is the ultimate religious liberty challenge. Ellen White said that the Liberty Sentinel, which is the direct precursor to Liberty Magazine, was the epitome of the three angels' messages, and that it should contain appeals to the Lord's Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath. But we always come full circle. We in our age, I believe, are seeing the beginnings of a clamor for a national Sunday law first, and then a global Sunday law. We don't know when all of these final events will come to a total fruition, but it's in process. We can see not just God's working through events, but Satan inserting himself with a false version of religious liberty, a false version of the custody of the environment, and a false version of worship. In other words, honoring the dishonor of changing the day. This should be the time that Adventists rally. This should be the time that we recognize now is the time to seek our Lord and rededicate ourselves to His service. We can't force revival, but if we're going to be serious about religious liberty, it's now. We're going to see even greater wonders ahead of us, along with terrible dislocations, financial and environmental. Of course, the Pope is onto something. As only a few naysayers deny and say that all things continue as they have from the beginning. Well, no, they're not. The bears in the Arctic area are not hibernating as they once were before. There are not sheets of ice where there once were. Now the nations are fighting over the open waters near the North Pole. The earth is groaning in travail. This is not business as usual. It's time for us to wake up. And of course, if we're filled with the Spirit of God, we should exalt, because this is the moment to proclaim as never before that God's freedom and God's liberty is ours for the having. But we must not compromise with a deceptive strategy and certainly a false day. Let me read something that appeared in the Review and Herald in 1898, speaking about the Sabbath and what will be done to it. Ellen White speaks of it being trampled underfoot. God's great memorial of creation established to commemorate His work, and in its stead, His power has presented to the world a common working day. It's not God's day, it's a common working day. She says, this day is set up as a rival Sabbath to be honored and observed. Thus the world has been turned against God, for the Lord declares that He has sanctified the day of His rest. Ellen White then writes on, the work now to be done in our world is to exalt the law of Lord and call the attention of the people to it. The time has come when the truth is to be proclaimed against falsehood and error. How do we do that? I don't think it's by us gathering outside Congress and demonstrating or saying this is the Antichrist. We have to give coherent public arguments, and we can project through our publications, and Liberty Magazine is a good example of that. Let me give you an insight into the logic that has taken grip of the religious liberty world. For example, there's a term that I know many of you have already heard. This repeated initially in a church context, but it has reached into the larger political world also. They speak about something being the common good. Of course, the Pope's speech on the environment before Congress was all on this nature. But the common good is exactly the same sort of rhetoric that in Jesus' day was invoked against Him. It's better that one man die than the whole world should perish. Better for the common good to keep the Sunday law. They might say we should sweep away a few dissidents because they're destroying the common good. They're disrupting our unanimity, our survival coalition. But the common good is set against individual rights. And fairly recently, at a major convocation of religious leaders, the main speaker got up and said this. It was not subtle at all. He said, there's far too much emphasis given to the individual rights of conscience, not enough to the corporate rights of the church. For that to gain credence in the United States, particularly where the rights of the individual were said to trump all sorts of kings and prelates, that means we're very close to the time when, as Ellen White said, applying it to our time, the time will come when good people will actually believe that in killing those who stand for the Lord's Sabbath, they are doing the will of God. It might seem bizarre, but that is upon us. So in turn, it's on us to speak the truth with power. We must define religious liberty correctly, not just defend it. We must resist social pressure to compromise the truth. Now is the time, more than ever, to do everything in our power to promote religious liberty.